The pearls are heavier than they look. They do not rest upon my collarbone. They press against it, a cold reminder of the mathematics that govern my breath. In the grand parlor of Vance Hall, the air smells of beeswax and ancient, hushed expectations. My father always said that a woman's beauty is a fleeting bloom, yet he spent a fortune ensuring mine was polished to a clinical shine. I stood there, perfectly still, a masterpiece of silk and silence, while in the room next door, the heavy scratch of a quill decided exactly how much my soul was worth per acre. They call it a courtship. I call it an audit. Preparation was never about comfort. It was about preservation. Every morning began with the ritual of the corset, a structural cage of whalebone that taught me the necessity of shallow breaths. My mother's hands were efficient, devoid of tenderness, as she inspected the clarity of my skin and the alignment of my teeth with the scrutiny of a merchant examining a bloodline. We were not preparing for a life, but for a viewing. "Softness is your currency, Isabella," she would whisper, smoothing the lace over my wrists as if she were polishing silver for a guest she intended to impress, and then outcharge. I spent hours practicing the art of the downward gaze, a calculated modesty designed to signal obedience to a man I had only met twice. In those meetings, Lord Ashforth did not look into my eyes to find a companion. He looked at my stature to calculate the strength of the heirs I might provide, and at my hands to see if they were delicate enough to signify a life of expensive idleness. I became an expert in the language of assets.
As this story unfolds, grant us your favor, stay within our circle, and keep watch, and tell us, where do you think this path will lead?
I knew that the flush in my cheeks was valued at £3,000, and the fluency of my French added another 1,000 to the settlement. To the world, I was a debutante in the height of fashion. To the ledger on my father's desk, I was a series of integers and dividends, a biological bridge between two crumbling estates that needed the mortar of my dowry to stand. I didn't walk. I moved as if I were being carried on a tray, careful not to chip the porcelain of my reputation before the final sale was recorded. The most intimate moments of my engagement did not happen in the garden under the moonlight, but in the suffocating silence of my father's study. I was not invited inside, of course. I was the subject of the meeting, and subjects are meant to be discussed, not consulted. I stood in the hallway, the heavy Alençon lace of my gown catching on the gilded wainscoting, listening to the muffled symphony of two men carving up my future. I heard the dry click of the decanter, the sound of a deal nearing its conclusion. Then came the voice of Lord Ashforth, calculating and precise. He wasn't asking about my temperament or the books I preferred. He was questioning the timber rights of the northern woods and the exact liquidity of the bonds my grandfather had left behind. Each time my father conceded a parcel of land, I felt a stitch in my own skin tighten. I was being bought in installments. The lace I wore felt like a shroud of exquisite craftsmanship. It was intended to make me look ethereal, a creature of light and air. Yet it was the heaviest thing I had ever carried. It was the physical manifestation of my price tag. When the doors finally opened and they emerged, smelling of tobacco and triumph, Ashforth took my hand. His grip was not that of a lover, but of a man checking the seal on a crate. He smiled at my father, a nod between partners who had successfully moved a difficult piece of inventory. I realized then that my wedding dress wasn't being fitted to my body. It was being fitted to the ledger. I was simply the mannequin required to hold the fabric upright until the ink was dry. Then came the painter. He did not ask me to smile. He asked me to endure. For 3 weeks, I was pinned to a chair like a butterfly under glass, tasked with holding a pose of effortless grace, while my spine screamed in protest. The portrait was to be the final receipt of the transaction, a visual proof of the quality Ashforth had acquired. The artist spent more time mixing the exact shade of the Ashforth emeralds on my neck than he did capturing the light in my eyes. To him, I was a landscape of silk and shadow. "Do not move, Isabella," he would command, his brush scratching against the canvas like a claw. I watched myself emerge in oil, a version of me that would never age, never weep, and never lose its market value. It was a strange sort of murder. As the paint dried, the girl who dreamed of more than a title began to fade, replaced by a gilded icon of compliance. By the time the final varnish was applied, the portrait was more real to the world than the woman standing beside it. I was no longer a person. I was a permanent asset, framed and ready for the gallery of a man who loved my cost, but never my heart. The ceremony was a quiet affair, conducted with the solemnity of a bank closing its doors for the evening. In the dim light of the chapel, the vows felt less like promises and more like clauses in a lease. When the priest asked if I took this man, I looked at the altar and saw not a divine union, but a final signature. "I do," was the sound of the cage door clicking shut. As Ashforth slid the ring onto my finger, the gold felt unnaturally cold, a brand of ownership that matched the ink on the contracts signed earlier that morning. There was no celebration in my father's eyes, only a profound sense of relief. The ledger was balanced, the debt was paid, and the burden of my maintenance had been successfully transferred. We walked out of the church into a shower of petals that looked like confetti but felt like ash. I was Lady Ashforth now, a titled extension of his estate, as silent and decorative as the heavy draperies in his drawing room. The transaction was finalized. The livestock had been delivered in lace. Years have passed, and the ink in the ledgers has faded to a dull brown, but the portrait remains. I sit beneath it now, watching the firelight dance across that younger version of myself, the one whose skin was worth a forest, and whose silence bought a dynasty. Guests pause before the canvas, admiring the exquisite light and the unrivaled detail of the lace, never noticing the woman sitting in the shadows just a few feet away. They see the prize, but they do not see the cost. I am still here, a ghost in my own hallways, realizing that the most expensive things in this world are often the ones that are never truly free.
If this tale has pleased your heart, grant us your favor and stand beside us.
And if you wish to hear many more, join us and keep watch for what comes next.